Justin Rader with Authority Effects here, and with me,
Ryan P. Wilson.
Today we're going to be discussing sculpting in Zbrush, starting with the basemesh, going over to 3D-Coat, retopologizing, then back into Zbrush, and doing the high poly sculpting and painting.
Justin's the resident sculptor at Authority Effects, and he's a master. I'm just here to ask questions and help this 40 minutes seem a little shorter.
We sped the video up by 2,000% to try to cut down on the amount of time that we'll have to sit there and stare at my brush going back and forth across this Jockey.
So what are you doing here?
Right now I am just using the clay brush, and I am pushing and extruding out details. Try to just get the general areas of detail that I want to capture when I actually take this into retopologize.
So is this Dynamesh right now?
It is.
So you can basically do whatever you want and you don't have to worry about topology.
Right. If you notice, right now I'm sculpting with about 1.2 million polygons. And, the nice thing about Dynamesh is, like, right now what I'm doing is just cutting away pieces of the mesh that I don't want to be there.
So it's like working with voxels and 3D-Coat, except it's a little faster since it's still a polygonal surface.
Exactly. Imagine if you just took a box and cut that box into a bunch of slices. Basically what Dynamesh does is just takes the volume shape of whatever you're doing and puts it inside that box, and then creates polygons at every equal grid point.
So how much detail would you put in at this point?
With the release of the latest ZBrush, you can actually take it up to probably about 4 million polygons Dynamesh. Right now I'm only working at 1. So the reason behind that is because I'm not trying to go super detailed. I am just trying to get the base mesh worked out.
And then we're taking it into 3D-Coat?
Yeah, to retopologize. Since this is actually going to be a game asset, I was more focused on trying to make sure my topology would come through in silhouette form versus if we were doing, say, a movie, and in which case we would rely heavily on displacement and trying to keep detail equalized across the entire mesh.
Right.
So basically what I'm doing here is just using the mask option, and I pulled out the teeth. Now I'm just kind of, again, playing with details. Right now I'm just kind of pushing the jagged, ripped out arm a little further, adding in some of the details that, again, I want to try to capture with polygons, and basically using that same masking function again to try to get a nice hard jeans line.
So you just simply mask out where you want the jeans and extrude?
Yeah. Now,
what's that brush you're using? The clay brush?
Yeah, clay brush just gives you a nice solid stroke to help build upon. It's not trying to inflate like most brushes. It is actually just pretty much, if you look at what it's doing before I smooth it out, just laying some clay down.
Strips of clay. So it's good for building volume.
Yeah. And I just cut off the toes, sculpting in some damage. Like, his feet got torn up pretty bad.
Now, what brush did you use there?
Again, just a combination of the clay build-up brush and the smooth brush.
Oh, so you can subtract with the clay brush?
What I did was mask it, delete those, and then I went in with the clay brush.
Well, right there, you're cutting out volume.
Yeah.
And that's the clay brush? Or no?
Yeah. Again, like, you can use the clay brush to build or subtract. It depends upon whether you have it on Z add or Z subtract.
Oh, okay. So I guess you're just about done here. You're going to be retopoing soon.
Yeah, just getting in that last detail. I sculpted all this from mind. I didn't have any reference, to go off of. So
okay.
Right now I'm kind of showing you the model was at 1.2 million polygons. I used this plugin that comes with ZBrush called Decimation Master. Basically what it does is it brought my model down to 240,000 polygons.
And it essentially keeps the same amount of detail.
Yeah, I mean, it's all tri-based. So
if that doesn't matter since we're bringing it into voxels.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted a mesh that wasn't over 3 million polygons. Bring it into here. And so now I'm just kind of showing a quick little way to retopologize in 3D-Coat. There's plenty of tutorials out there that goes over everything I was doing. So that's why I skipped over the retopologizing, and now I'm just showing you my final mesh that I came up with.
And how many polys was that?
Um, Around 2,700, I believe.
And what was the original game asset?
Like 3,500.
Okay.
And right now, what I'm doing is taking that high-res Dynamesh sculpt, uh, merging it with my retopologized mesh, and now I'm projecting the detail onto my topologized mesh.
So is that it? Is that after the projection?
Yeah, I think I'm actually doing one more. Basically, what I do is I subdivide, project, and so forth. Because sometimes if you go straight from the lowest resolution to the highest, polygons will shoot off into space because just they're not close enough to meet the threshold. So ZBrush doesn't quite know what to do with them.
Okay.
So now we're looking at the low res that I've subdivided several times, and now I'm doing the high poly sculpting. I'm actually on the 5th subdivision. I will eventually go into the 6th subdivision. I'm just kind of blocking out, again, more details. I try not to always sculpt on the highest subdivision just because I use that for the, fine detail work, which can also be kind of tedious and slow.
Like the pores on the skin, and you'd use noise for that?
Yeah.
And what do they call that in ZBrush?
Surface.
Right. So it looks like you're pulling the teeth out again.
Yeah, when I retopologized, I tried to keep the teeth mesh low, so it really is just like 6 polygons. And because of doing that, when I reprojected, the teeth kind of smoothed themselves over, so they were just little stumps. And now I'm just, going in, using a combination of the slash brush, I believe it's slash 3, and the clay brush and the smooth brush. Just trying to get some basic anatomy. One thing you'll notice is that the Jockey is anatomically correct, but at the same time, a very exaggerated version of that. Looking at the shoulders and where the shoulder blades would be placed. So sometimes you'll see me trying to be realistic, and other times I will just go ahead and start doing my own thing, as it is, a game based on dead things.
Now I've noticed you don't spend a lot of time in one area. You kind of move over the model. You'll try to spend your time equally on the entire model itself. Won't spend an hour on the head in one go.
Exactly. I try to, constantly move around. I don't want to spend too much time on one part because I'm not in that heavy detailing phase. I really just want to get everything blocked out, see how it's looking, make sure I'm going in the right direction. The worst thing to do is spend, 5 hours modeling as this great head, and then you look at the rest of the body and the head doesn't match the rest of the body's vision. And then you either need to start over or, undo a bunch of work and try to make everything mesh together. When I was sculpting this, I kind of had the idea of maybe as he was going, transforming into an infected, maybe he was going a little insane and was therefore ripping his eyes out. I'll actually carry that theme across the rest of the body as I get to those parts. You'll see lots of slash marks that would look like they're self-inflicted rather than, maybe from battle.
So what do you think happened to his hand?
I don't know, maybe you lost it in a lawnmower. Who knows? Maybe he was like a little groundskeeper guy.
So I've noticed on this section here, you've been using a lot of brushes where you're basically just cutting away volume, and you said you were using the slash brush. What about the forehead wrinkles when you get to that? What's your approach for that?
I believe I use the standard brush. When it gets that part, I can double check.
The damn standard brush?
No, just the standard brush.
Oh, what's the damn standard brush?
The damn standard brush is more of like a standard brush mixed with a pinch brush. So as you're pulling up, you're also pulling the vertices in. Whereas the pinch brush doesn't inflate, it just pulls everything to the center point. So the damn standard brush is good for creating cuts or clothing wrinkles if you're using a very wide fall off. Right now I'm back to using the slash brush to kind of carve in some of these details. Earlier, I know I was using the damn standard brush to make some of those cuts.
So we're doing wrinkles right here.
Yeah, these are going to be the forehead wrinkles. First, what I do is I just draw in where I want them to be, and then actually, I guess I'm not using the standard brush. I'm using the clay buildup brush to add in some of the fatty, uh, wrinkling to accentuate where the cuts were, and then I just go over all that with the smooth brush to kind of make the details not as sharp.
I like what you're doing back here.
Yeah, I referenced my own bald head for this.
Did you get a mirror to take a picture?
I've just seen it too many times throughout the years of looking at hair loss.
Oh, man.
You'll notice there are 4 claw marks, trying to go back to the self-inflicted. We'll pretend that this is he ripped his ear off prior to losing his pinky finger, because once we move down to the hand, you'll notice he only has 3 fingers left. Now we're moving on to the body. I'm just kind of trying to make the ribs poke through a little brighter.
Oh, I like the pecs. That looks good. Guy used to be a bodybuilder or something.
Yeah. I kind of figured, maybe as he was getting thinner, he was also getting stronger. Kind of one of the things with the tank in Left 4 Dead. He's a super behemoth of a muscle beast.
He's a Ronnie Coleman.
And all the special infected, they all look a little beefy except for maybe the what's his name? The guy Smoker.
Oh, Smoker, yeah.
So now what I did was
well, he smokes, so
yeah, that's why he's not strong.
If that's not an advertisement for anti-smoking, I don't know what is.
So what I did there was I masked out where the arm was going to be ripped open, and then I used on the right hand side the deformation tab and just used the inflate and set it to like -5 to push all the mass in that area closer together.
And that keeps all the detail, just pushes everything in?
Yeah.
That looks good.
And just kind of running over everything with the clay buildup brush. When I sculpt details like this, I really don't plan it out. I just kind of go wherever my brush takes me and then build patterns out of the chaos.
I like that because you can really see the muscle sinew. You can see overlapping fibers.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not anatomically correct, but whatever. I was just having fun with it. Earlier there, I was using a deco brush. As to exactly what the deco brush does, it kind of, as you're drawing it, it also spirals whatever alpha channel it's currently using. And that creates a weird looking pattern. It's kind of like the clay buildup brush mixed with that spiral. So it kind of gives you this infected, kind of gory look if you layer it right. You'll see me using it quite a bit as I start to get into higher res detailing.
So that brush you were just using on the pants, was that to sort of make it look like a frayed fabric?
Yeah.
And I guess because the pants don't look symmetric, you have to do one leg at a time here.
Exactly. And I'm actually using a cloth brush, which I downloaded from a website that I cannot recall as I did it several years ago. It's almost like the standard brush mixed with the damn standard brush, but the focal point isn't centered. It's more at the top.
Looks great.
And it really is just, I do the stroke, then go back over that stroke with the smooth brush, which is just holding shift.
So did you use reference for the kneecaps?
I did. Just Google images. And one thing that you'll notice after I sculpt in all the detail of getting it anatomically correct, I then go through and just add a bunch of gore and slashed openness. And so it's kind of a waste of time per se, but at the same time, you're doing that gore on top of something that would have, been there. So it kind of adds a sort of realism to it rather than just going in, cutting open his knee, and then trying to push the knee to look something of what a knee should look like.
I like the bone sticking out of his toe there. That looks good.
believe I'm using, yeah, the damn standard brush, just kind of going in. I don't know if you've noticed, every time I make a big cut, I then go around it and outline it, trying to get a hard edge as if the flesh was, ripped out.
So is that a missing toenail?
Yeah. On the other toe, you'll see me sculpt in a toenail
Pretty gross.
coming up here soon. Yeah. So it's kind of half there, broken, but there. What's funny is a lot of these details, I'd say probably over 50%, especially the close-up stuff.
Yeah, you'll never see it in a game.
Yeah.
And even if the game had detailed enough maps to render that, you're never going to be looking at his toe.
Exactly. When I sculpt, I get carried away. That's another reason why I never subdivided this creature more than 3 million polygons, because I would just get lost in making all the high-res detail.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't see the detail showing up, you're not going to focus on it. So you just keep working on the main,
Exactly.
the large, like you said, silhouette. You want them to be noticeable in silhouette, the work you do.
Yeah. Right here, I'm just adding some, fattiness to his feet. Just taking the clay buildup brush, and I just draw a bunch of lines, and then smooth it all out, and it gives you kind of that imperfect skin. There's something underneath there, look. And now I'm undoing all that detail that I spent putting into the kneecaps by slicing them open. Adding a nice deep gash.
What'd you use to push it in?
Just the move brush. Sometimes I'll use the standard brush. I guess it just depends upon what mood I'm in. Now we're just into all the wound sculpting. Trying to, give him some character. These wounds on his legs, I didn't feel would be self-inflicted. That's why they're not as defined.
These are from crawling around on the ground, jockeying people.
Yeah.
It's riding him.
You'll notice there is a distinction between these wounds. They're kind of torn up, like, ripped off through gravel, especially the one that was on his ankle. And then as we get higher up on the body, you'll start to notice that they get really sharp, as if, he's clawing his body apart. And then some of these are just, typical places of you'd run into a fence, maybe. Maybe he was trying to, jump over a chain link fence after one of his victims. Didn't quite make it. I mean, Jockey spun in a 360, landed on his head. Who knows? Here again, just kind of adding in, more wounds. This one I wouldn't say is self-inflicted.
So when you're doing these wounds, it's a very tedious process. Obviously, you're building each one from scratch. You're not using any alphas.
Right.
You're just building them with brushes. Is that the way you've always done it, or is this something new that you've got into recently?
For a while, I was hooked on alphas. I think I was always scouring the internet looking for the perfect alpha brush for whatever effect I was trying to achieve. And obviously, I'd spend hours gathering alphas. And over time, it just started to become tedious and a waste of time. And then I watched several videos of other digital sculptors who, would just go in and carve out exactly what they needed, unless it was like a specific pattern in which an alpha channel is going to give you.
Right.
But I mean, wounds like these, you're never going to find a great alpha channel that's going to be high res enough to give you all the detail you need without having to go back over it anyway.
So if you have to do it anyway, you might as well just get what you want the first time.
Exactly. Plus, adds that personal touch. I can actually say I sculpted every polygon of this creature, because never once did I use an actual alpha brush.
Was it a learning process to do this, or you just sat down and gave it a shot and it turned out great?
It is a learning process. It takes a lot of time as well. Anyone who has done sculpting with alphas knows that, within a click, you have a great looking creature. However, it'll lack some of the finer details. Like in here, I'm adding in some of the fattiness around the creases of his arm. With an alpha channel, you won't get that. An alpha either adds or subtracts. It doesn't do both.
So how much did you speed up this video?
1,500 to 2,000%, depending
Wow.
upon each portion.
So, I mean, I was watching you sculpt the thing while I was working on the other tutorials we did. And, you spent a few days on this, at least 10 hours.
Yeah, definitely. It's a long process, especially when you have a creature like this who has, self-inflicted wounds all over his body. And after we discussed, not using alpha brushes, I, didn't have a way of cheating it to make it go any faster, so. Here I'm just sculpting in his fingers.
So are those bones, those sharp edges, or what?
I kind of felt that that's how they would end up. And I really don't know if I actually got around to painting it properly. I think I actually ended up just leaving it as skin and then covering it in blood. So maybe that's my mistake, but if anyone ever notices, I don't think that will happen. When it's covered in blood, what can you say? So, how do you think he lost his thumb?
Oof. To quote Sambath Tran. I don't know, could have been another lawnmower accident.
Yeah. Maybe he was like trying to get something
I think
out of
more probable as well, he was jockeying someone and he had his arm around them. They bit it off.
Or he tried to like put his hand through the door and they slammed it on him. It looks pretty gross. I was definitely trying to go with a ripped tendon, as well as maybe like an infection spreading underneath.
Well,
we're not talking about just a typical, go get an antibiotic infection. We're talking the
gangrene.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the shredded tank, and he looks like he's bursting out of his skin.
Yeah.
What was your theme on the hoodless hunter?
I just didn't want him to have a hood. There really was
not much more you can say on that.
Yeah, I just kind of felt that he was in the South, since it takes place in Left 4 Dead 2, and why would anybody in the hot southern heat be wearing a hoodie?
Right.
And it helped him blend in with the common infected. And actually, talking about the shredded tank, I decided to incorporate some of that with the Jockey. It looks like he got very muscular in his back, and he's all hunched over. Maybe his skin's decaying. So, kind of decided, let's rip open his back.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And you could also look at it in that if he's riding on people's backs, I mean, they're probably smashing him up against walls trying to get him off.
Yeah.
So you could have lost all that flesh.
I actually used one brush I haven't used in anything prior to this, which was the rake brush. And basically it just does exactly what it says. It's almost like you're going over the sculpture with a rake. And now all that detail is pretty much gone. You can still see hints of it more towards the actual spine area.
So you just smoothed over it?
Yeah.
Did you not like what you did, or was that purposeful just to sort of...
It was one of those things of I was trying out an idea. Maybe I liked it, maybe I didn't.
Well, let's talk about that, because I've heard you say this many times, as you don't like to hit undo, and you rarely do hit the undo button.
Yeah. The undo button, to me, just takes you out of your sculpting process, especially on higher res models. When you hit undo, it takes ZBrush, depending upon how high a model you're sculpting, could be 30 seconds before you're back to sculpting. So to me, unless it's actually critical that I undo it, I will just try to smooth over it and see it as more of a happy accident that
might take you somewhere you didn't foresee.
Yeah, I mean, when I originally sculpted the pecs, you can see that there's no symmetry between the two. And that was because there was a difference in the model from prior sculpting and as well as the polygon work. So the pecs didn't work out quite right. So that's why I added in that detail on top, because originally, I didn't have that wound where it was going to be in my head. But after seeing that happy accident of the difference in the meshes, the sides, I just decided, it looks like an area that got cut. And then here I'm just going back over, sharpening up the details, making it look like the skin was raised as well as ripped. Just quickly, going over it. Nothing too fancy. It's hard to see when the video is spread up like this, but my brush strokes are actually just really fine, almost like I'm etching, rather than just actually tracing as one big movement.
So what are we doing here?
Defining the pants. I could have taken that further. Technically, if this was going to be a movie, that would be a completely separate mesh.
Yeah, we obviously do it as a cloth simulation, but doesn't happen in games. Not yet.
One day, maybe. Just adding in details. Nothing fancy, just the seams of the pants. And going back to basics, that was just the clay buildup brush and the damn standard brush. For those familiar with Zbrush, you'll know there's, probably like 50 to 100 different brushes.
How many of those do you use frequently?
Probably about 5.
So why do you think they have so many brushes?
Like any digital application, there's people who like to just play and create a brush for one purpose only. And that brush may be good for that one purpose, but how often is that one purpose ever used?
Right. I mean, if you were a traditional sculptor, you wouldn't have 1,000 tools sitting on your desk.
Exactly. I think most traditional sculptors usually only have about 3 to 4 tools. So, not saying that digital sculpting is anything like real sculpting.
Just saying.
When it comes down to it, the basics are there, and
So what are you doing here? Adding texture to the...
Yeah, here I'm actually using the surface tool, and I just added detail to the pants. Now I'm adding detail to his skin, and if you'll notice, I'm using the layers panel because I wanted to add this detail and then have the ability to turn it off and on for any additional sculpting, as well as smoothing. I don't want to smooth over the fine details.
Can you create masks by depth if you wanted to sort of add detail to all of the model where it was below a certain depth?
And that's actually when we get to the painting process, you'll see me do that.
Okay.
So if you noticed, I added a kind of wrinkly noise all over the jockey's body, and then I've turned it off using the layers tabs, and now I'm going back and adding fine details like the veins.
So this is a subdivision higher now?
Yeah, we are on the highest subdivision.
Is this the highest ZBrush can go?
No. I would be able to take him one more, and then after that, since it is a 32-bit program still that runs in a 64-bit environment,
Yeah, you only have access to 2
it really
gigabytes.
only still takes you to 4 gigs of RAM.
Sorry, 4.
So that usually, from what I've noticed, is about 15 million polys, and I think he's like 3.6 million. So that would take us pretty close to 15. I guess actually that would be more like 16.
Yeah. So what are you doing here?
Here, I am choosing the skin color.
How do you make that decision?
I actually just opened up Valve's Jockey and sampled his original skin color, just one of the more neutral areas.
Now, I noticed you're painting sometimes with lighting and sometimes without.
Yeah.
Why do you do that?
Helps you see better. You'll actually notice as well, right now I'm modifying the material that I was using to take off some of the specular sheen. I want to be able to see the crevices in the model, but I also want it to just be as flat as possible. And I think with this material I was able to do that. It's the skin shade 4, and then I just increased the diffuse to 100 and lowered the specular sheen.
So I noticed you're putting on a lot of layers of subtle pastel tones. I mean, even where there's blood, you're not going blood color, you're just laying on like a sort of pinkish color.
Right. It's kind of like when I was sculpting the knee, I wanted to get those details in before I then went ahead and added the details that would be prominent that moment. So what I'm doing here is treating him as if he had just woken up in the morning and hadn't even taken a shower. This is just how he is.
He's a dirty looking man.
Definitely is. I add the basic skin tone, then I go through and add some red areas. kind of where circulation would be closer to the surface. And then I took some orangey colors, kind of played with those into the facial area, try to break up, give them some blemish. And I'm actually using that mask by cavity. As you'll notice, there's a lot of detail that's getting put into the model. And that's not just from me going through and painting each part meticulously. It's the mask by cavity.
The paint is more opaque where there's no cavities.
Right.
Is that the idea? Okay.
And then I would invert between the two. So maybe if I was masking by the depth, I would use a red brush or a red color.
Well, how come
put that in?
Why are his pants orange? Because I know on the final they're
originally I was going to give him brown pants because I felt everybody who has pants, they're always blue. And then after making the brown pants, I decided I would try to go with like a dirty blue, like maybe he's been crawling around the sewers. And then eventually it just turned into normal blue. I just kept painting until it felt right.
Do you have those pants masked right now, or are you just being careful not to get blue on this skin?
They are masked. The mask is turned off. You'll notice that it looks like the jockey turns African American sometimes. And that is when the mask is visible. And right now I'm just adding in the fringing of the pants. And now I'm doing the seam color. And I didn't like what I did, so I'm taking some of the pants color and drawing back over it. And now I'm adding it in a little bit lighter and just kind of detailing the pants.
Just kind of the stitching?
Yeah. Now we're on to the bruising. Kind of going around areas. Maybe he hit himself or somebody hit him with a pipe trying to get him off. Who knows? Maybe he got hit by a car there. Nice big bruise across his ribs. Areas of maybe people pushing or punching at his hands, trying to pull him off, as well as obviously falling on his kneecaps.
Now, disregarding the alphas, do you use different brushes when painting, or do you stick with one or two brushes?
I painted this jockey in its entirety with just the standard brush color spray. And I have like a 0.05 spray variation. So I'm not spraying a solid color. There is a speckled variation to him.
So it shifts the hue slightly?
Yeah. And right now I'm using a mask on the wounds and just kind of painting in like a dead but dry look. So the wounds are open, but they're not bleeding at the moment. Now I'm just kind of going in, adding in some of the finer details, giving them some kind of darker spots as well as some fleshier spots. And the reason I do not paint him bloody right now is because I use all those as a matte to, paint my specular. That way I don't have to paint the blood, then paint the specular.
So that blood's on a separate layer right now?
Yeah, well right now there is no blood. This is all just dry open wounds. This is all still on the model. No layers.
Eventually you will add a layer.
Yeah. Blood. Yeah, that's why, you'd be like, well, why is he all cleaned up? If I had wounds like that, I probably wouldn't be that clean.
Yeah. Gotcha.
I tend to go darker towards the deep end and then brighter on the areas that are closer to the surface.
Well, I find that helps at render time. In the past, when we relied on AO rather than a full irradiance calculation, we didn't really need that because the ambient occlusion darkened everything. But now that we're doing full irradiance calculations, I find we're not getting as much contrast in our models. So I find when you go a little bit darker in your crevices on your paintwork, it helps.
Yeah. Now, if that's physically accurate, I'm not quite sure. I've never encountered a wound like this. But it really is just switching between the two colors. One's a reddish orange and the other is just a reddish brown. I'm not really trying to be super detailed. I'm just quickly laying in some color variation. It's kind of like sculpting. I feel like if you focus on one part too long during the painting process, you'll end up with this amazing piece that's maybe 5% of the model, and you get yourself, tired. You don't want to sit there and do that over the next 95%. So here, I loaded in a bunch of blood alphas, uh, splatters, and created a new layer, which you'll see on the right. I named blood.
These are the blood alphas that I downloaded, I think, to do the house that Jack built.
I guess so.
Like in 2009.
Yeah.
They're just Photoshop brushes I found.
Yeah, and I'm just cycling between alphas, using the drag rectangle brush, and just chaotically dropping them everywhere. Everywhere that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you'll see that I'm putting blood on top of the wound. Right there I masked it because I just quickly wanted to throw it down, but I didn't want to really get, the whole skin area covered. I wanted more of that speckled look.
Now, this is something where I really think alphas are a complete necessity.
Yeah.
Because to get that speckled, splatter, runny blood, that's extremely hard to paint and time consuming. It's not necessary.
Yeah. I'll actually go back over with a wet pen brush and draw in some additional detail, but that's really only to tie in some of the loose ends that I couldn't achieve with an alpha, just because I didn't have the alpha that did exactly what I wanted to do.
So how often do you take a look at the model in shaded view versus flat? I mean, how much time do you spend texturing in shaded versus flat?
I'd say probably like 90% shaded, 10% flat. Flat really is just giving me the impression of exactly what the texture looks like. Sometimes it just depends. I might spend 80% in flat view if I've already gone through and gotten all the details in, and then I'm just, cleaning up.
So areas. That right there, that's not an alpha.
No, this is the wet pen brush.
Because it looks a lot like dripping blood, and you don't have to put a lot of work in to get that. You basically just draw a line that looks that way.
Yeah, it simulates as if you had like a wet brush and you were putting it up against paper. The longer you hold the brush there, the more the liquid's able to expand out.
Oh, okay. So to control the blotting, you just hold your pen a little longer.
So I created a new layer. Here I'm just adding dirt across the jockey's body. And why I didn't do this on the original base coat is, again, it's a detail that I see as something that should be turned off and have control over. Like you're going to take a shower. You obviously wouldn't have dirt on you anymore. So that first coat is how the jockey would look no matter what, every single day. And then the next coats afterwards I want to have control over.
This guy's been drinking too much coffee. That's yellow teeth.
Yeah. And then what I'm doing here is just creating a white layer so I can get my blood and dirt maps exported.
So you can put it back together in Photoshop?
Yeah.
Just for a little more control? Why can't you do that in ZBrush?
ZBrush doesn't have a layer system. I mean, it's a layer system.
Yeah, but they don't have blending modes.
Yeah, they don't have the blending modes to do it. And now what I'm doing is a little trick that I learned from ZBrush. You make a square object. Right now my resolution is set to 4096 by 4096, and I generated a displacement map. Then I load that displacement map onto the texture, or the flat poly surface. Yeah. And now I'm just cycling through materials, and I can generate lighting passes without having to take it into.
Where did you learn that? In a video or something?
Yeah, from ZBrush.
Okay.
So now we're in Photoshop with all the layers. This is the finished view of the jockey's color map. I am just going to turn all these layers off, and we'll start from the base. So this is what I painted inside ZBrush. Doesn't look all that fancy now, does it? Looks pretty bland. Yeah, you got all the details. If this were a film, I would probably go through and I would have used a tighter specular brush or speckle brush. As you can see, it's very blotchy, not very human-like. But then again, this guy is very sick. So, first thing I did was I wasn't happy with how pale he was, so I darkened him up a bit and then changed him to a reddish color.
Is that just an adjustment layer?
It's a levels and then a hue and saturation, but yeah, they are both adjustment layers. I wanted to make sure that if I ever wanted to, I could quickly come back and tweak these.
Mm-hmm.
And underneath these, you'll see 2 layers. These are just different masks. One's just gore, one's gore with pants.
Okay.
So the very first layer is I just added this little bit of AO. However, I set it to vivid light and 3%, and all that does is just add that little bit of brightness. As for why, it was something I just wanted to do after I had already added a bunch of other layers. And instead of using a levels, for some reason I chose that.
What's this next layer here?
This next layer, I called it Gorilla_2, and that is because that is what the matte cap inside Zbrush is called.
What's a matte cap?
The materials.
Oh.
When I was working, the shaded view of that.
Yeah.
So this is Gorilla, and the O2 actually stands for the amount of displacement I had. I name my files that in case I want to, say, decrease displacement to get more shine.
Can you turn that on and off?
And you cannot see...
It adds a lot of lighting.
Yeah. Definitely in the back here, you can see it.
Now, is this something you need for a game asset to help sell it at render time?
Yeah. Since a lot of lighting is not real time, it is hard to notice.
So the lighting's baked in?
Yeah.
Now, what angle do you use? How do you know where to set the light? What sort of light angle do you use?
I just use mostly a top-down.
Okay. So just pretty much the most common.
Yeah, like not specific any kind of lighting.
Yeah.
It would look strange if he was outside and you see the lighting coming from his left.
Right.
So just going top-down is kind of generic. Usually lights are always above you. So I just turned this on to 100% and hit all the layers underneath it so we could actually see just what I was able to render off here in ZBrush. And, it's kind of a simple thing. Set that back to 50. And now we add on the dirt.
Was that a layer you painted in ZBrush?
Yeah. And then the blood. And
okay.
Both these are set to multiply.
Yep.
And you can see a lot of that detail that is being added in now versus how it looked inside ZBrush since they don't have multiply as an option. And it mixes well with the gore.
It darkens where it overlaps.
Open wounds would be. So
looks good.
And then we add on some specular sheen. Just zoom in here, turn it off and on. Didn't want to go too bright with it. It's at 15%.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just turn all these off and crank this up so we can see exactly what was being used inside ZBrush to generate this. Really very strong compared to the final look. Especially if you would leave it on 100%.
Does the render engine in the game render specular?
It does. And I generated a specular map to go with the blood.
So what's the advantage of adding some specular here baked right into the map?
Just having that baked in lighting helps sell it. If you don't have it, the model can
some
look
finer
kind of
detail.
flat. Yeah.
Okay.
So again, this one was more focused on the skin. And actually, if I turn all these off again, turn it up, you will notice that I have actually cut out everywhere where there was an open wound. Because this is purely just for the skin.
Okay.
Drop that down to 15 again. And here, we are adding in the AO, which is generated out of X normals. Any game artist, I'm sure, is well aware of what X normals is. For those of you who don't know, it is just a program that lets you bring in multiple models, like my high res and my base mesh, and then it looks at the differences between the two of them and creates maps.
Okay.
And this one, I created an ambient occlusion. Turn that off. Now we can see. So all the areas where light wouldn't be able to get in, obviously, is darker. And you'll notice his sides are dark, as well as his stomach and the insides of his arms. That's because it's based on where the model is currently positioned. Yeah, so if I didn't want his arms to be dark, I would have to rig the model into a T pose, because people notice his arms were down to his sides.
Yeah. Well, that's usually how he looks in the game anyway.
Exactly. So. That's why I left him that way. Another thing I could have done, which I didn't do, is you can put a ground floor with your model, so it could have darkened these feet. But at the same time, after you've killed the jockey and he's laying on the floor, you wouldn't want his feet to be black when they're clearly up in the air. So it's just personal preference. Some may do it, some may not.
What's your final layer here?
And we just turn this back to multiply. And the final layer is some additional
just for the wounds,
which I wanted on top of the ambient occlusion.
Yeah, so it's like a thin surface.
Yeah, so it just adds that little bit of detail.
Yeah, because you don't want to have AO on the specular.
Yeah.
Not a good call.
And so that is the jockey. We'll move over to the specular map that I was talking about.
And this plugs into the game engine?
Yeah, so this is where the game engine will see white as shiny and black as not shiny at all. So I gave his skin very dull black, so it'll pick up some sheen, but not very much, whereas obviously his open wounds are shinier, and then the blood is, shiniest.
Sweet deal. Let's take a look at this thing in the game.
Hello!
Oh, yeah.
So, I guess that about does it.
Here's a render we did in Houdini. It's using the PBR render engine, Mantra.
So?
Yeah, that's it.
Hope it was worthwhile.